Well, good evening, and welcome all of you to the newly refurbished Greenberg Lounge. And we are thrilled that it can be the venue for this year's continuation of our Attorney General Robert Abrams Public Service Lecture. This is one of the most important annual events on the law school's calendar. It's a hallmark event at the law school. It provides us an opportunity, of course, to bring a leader in public service here to the school and to hear directly from them, and is also an opportunity for us to honor and thank so many people in our community, among our current students and our graduates who have or who will devote their careers to public service, and in particular to honor one prime exemplar of excellence in public service, and that is Robert Abrams, NYU Law Class of 1963. And so, Bob, we are tremendously grateful to you, and thank you for establishing this lecture with us and for providing throughout your career the amazing example that you have provided. More on that in a moment. Let me also just say that I want to thank tonight's speaker, Attorney General Josh Shapiro, for joining us. You really continue the traditions of this lecture, and we thank you for honoring us with your presence. He will be introduced in a moment, but it is my great and happy task to introduce Robert Abrams. And as I say, he is a wonderful example of dedication to public service throughout his career. Indeed, a nearly 30-year career in government. He was a member of the New York State Assembly, having served 3 terms also as the Bronx Borough President. In 1978, was elected to serve the first of 4 terms as New York State's Attorney General. While serving in that role, he received many awards and received national acclaim for the many groundbreaking achievements and important problem-solving initiatives that he led in that office, and just as much as the very important policy initiatives that Bob spearheaded over his many years in the office, is the way that he did it, that he led that office with deep integrity, with a commitment to public service and to serving the public, and really sort of led by that example, not only those within his office, but I think if you talk to people in the New York Attorney General's office today, they will point to Bob Abrams as the kind of example to which all attorneys general ought to aspire. And so when someone of that stature graduates from a law school that is ours, we claim him with both arms, and want to really encourage our students as they think about models in their own career to look to Bob Abrams for exactly that. His legacy and expertise continues to be deeply important to us here at the law school and to many institutions in law and public life. So after completing his time as Attorney General, he has continued to serve the public in myriad ways. And as I say, we are deeply, deeply proud of him. Bob, thanks for all that you do for this law school and this community, but more than that, for this state and for the rule of law and for public service. So without further ado, let me ask you all to join me in welcoming Bob Abrams.
Dean, thank you very, very much. That was very gracious, and I'm appreciative. As I look out before you, I can't believe that we've been doing this for 23 years. And actually, the reason why we established this program is as important and relevant today as when we did it a couple of decades ago. I was talking to the then Dean, John Sexton, and was telling him at that time, Dean, I'm really worried. I'm worried that students, because of what they read in the newspaper and what they believe to be a pretty dirty and cruddy business of politics and government, will drop out, will not want to aspire to spend some portion of their life or career in public service or even enter government and run for public office. When the fact is that, sure, we've got issues and problems, and we need that youthful energy, integrity, conscience, commitment to help remold our society and make it a better place. And my own experience has been that, yes, there are those in public life who betray the public trust, but my experience was that the bulk of those who I worked with were men and women of genuine ability, real commitment to public service, and I was overwhelmingly impressed with them. And I just felt that it was important for students to see what I experienced. And I wanted to bring to the law school every year somebody whose life, career, value system would be important, emblematic of what a public career would be all about, and hopefully inspirational enough for them to want to spend some part of their career in public service, and perhaps even run for public office or serve on the staff of an elected official. And so that's the genesis of this program. And certainly today, there's much that can discourage people based upon what's going on. And so that's why we need Josh Shapiro here tonight, because he, like his predecessors at this podium, is going to be a symbol for you of what public service can be all about. Let me tell you a few things about Josh. His father was a pediatrician. His mother was a public school teacher. He went to the University of Rochester, was elected student body president, graduates magna cum laude, and right within minutes of graduating from the University of Rochester, he gets a job on the Hill to work with for a pretty good congressman, Congressman Deutsch from Florida. And he becomes the senior advisor to the congressman. A couple of years later, becomes the senior advisor to United States Senator Bob Torricelli from New Jersey. A couple of years later, becomes the chief of staff of a congressman, the youngest chief of staff on the Hill that year. In the interim, he decides to go to law school at night and goes to the Georgetown Center of Law. He then, after doing that stint of public service, decides that he wants to spend some time in the private sector and spends 10 years as a private attorney. But in the midst of that, decides he wants to run for office, becomes a candidate and wins a seat in the State House. Within 2 years of winning that seat, he gets appointed the deputy speaker of the House of Representatives in the state of Pennsylvania. An extraordinary achievement because he's an extraordinary guy. He then runs for county commissioner in Montgomery County, gets the biggest vote in the history of that office, and a couple of years later runs in a primary and a general election, tough fights, both of them, and becomes the Attorney General of Pennsylvania. And as Attorney General, he instantly, because of his charisma, because of his dedication, because of his independence and his integrity and his leadership skills, becomes a leader among attorneys general in the country. He fights for consumers, for senior citizens, for veterans. He's a defender of women's reproductive rights. He's right out there in the vanguard. And as the Trump administration begins to take incursions into gains that were made over the last number of decades for women's reproductive freedom, on issues of immigration and the right to travel, on issues relating to the environment, Attorney General Josh Shapiro was out there filing more than 24 lawsuits, working cooperatively with other attorneys general. And then came a blockbuster. Courageously, he was involved in an investigation that led to a bombshell report, investigating inappropriate behavior on the part of Roman Catholic clergy. And as a result of his investigation, he released a report that indicated that over the decades, more than 1,000 documented children, young people, were abused by 301 clergy, priest predators, naming names, taking the lead, causing ripples not only in the state of Pennsylvania and throughout the United States, but throughout the world, with the Pope convening a conference to deal with the issue, and Attorney General Shapiro has spoken personally with the Pope about these issues, and being an inspiration to other state attorneys general to launch similar investigations in their states. And in fact, a week and a half ago, it was the Attorney General of Missouri, a Republican Attorney General, a Roman Catholic. I mean, it was pretty gutsy and courageous for Josh Shapiro, a member of the Jewish faith, to take on an issue like this. And we were chatting before, and he had a premonition that if he took on this case, it would probably be the end of his political career. The investigation was actually started by his predecessor. And early on, he was told about this secret grand jury investigation that was going on, and at that point he had the ability to stop it in its tracks, but said that the imperative of morality compelled him to say, full speed ahead, and let's take it wherever it goes. And so Josh Shapiro is a guy who is an exemplar of somebody who went into public service and is engaged in the important struggles of our day and our time. And so for all these reasons, it's my privilege and pleasure and honor to introduce you to the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro.
Thank you. I actually don't know how to follow that. Typically, they read a short bio, and then you come up and you give your spiel. That was beautiful. Bob, thank you very much for the kind words, and thank you for summarizing some of the work we've done in the beautiful way that you did. Bob Abrams is one of the first people I sought out when I was running for Attorney General back in 2015, 2016. I had heard about Bob, and I had heard about the way in which he ran his office, and I heard about the fact that he liked to mentor other attorneys general. And it meant a lot to me that he gave me a meeting. It meant a lot to me that, actually, you invested early in my campaign, which I was grateful for. And it means a lot to be able to call on Bob, and it means an incredible amount to be able to stand here today in front of this NYU Law School symbol and have the honor to speak to all of you at Bob's invitation, and I'm truly grateful. So thank you, Bob. I appreciate it, and I'm grateful to the Dean, and most importantly, I'm grateful to all of you for being here, because there are lots of other things that you could be doing this evening, and I'm grateful that we have the opportunity to spend some time together. I was hoping to speak for 15 or 20 minutes, and then most importantly, take your questions, because I think it's important that we have an opportunity to engage in dialogue. I want to hear what's on your mind. Bob talked a little bit about my path in public service. What he didn't tell you, though, is why I got involved in public service in the first place. And the truth is, it really emanates from two things that Bob spoke about, and a third that I'll touch on. One was my mom, the public school teacher. Two is my dad, the pediatrician. I loved how people in the community would seek out both of them for help and assistance and guidance when they had a challenge or they had an issue. I loved the way they could nurture people and bring them along. But the third thing I drew strength from and purpose from was my faith. And I'm not here to lecture you on your faith or the absence thereof, but I'm here to tell you why I'm involved in public service. I'm involved because Scripture teaches us that no one is required to complete the task, but neither are we free to refrain from it. I've taken that very seriously throughout my life. A deep belief that you've got to get off the sidelines and get in the game and do your part. And for some people, that involves being a law school professor. For others, it's a teacher or a doctor or whatever. For me, it was a life of public service, a life of engagement to try to help others. And it began for me on Capitol Hill, as you heard, until I had that moment where I was tired of whispering in somebody's ear. I wanted to get out and shout from the rooftops and tell people what was on my mind. And that took me back home to the community where I grew up, and service in the State House of Representatives, service in our county government, now ultimately service as the Attorney General. I want to talk a little bit about that work and then have a dialogue with you. I think now more than ever, the rule of law is being tested. Now more than ever, we've got to work together to defend the rule of law and to recognize that we live in a world that is much bigger than just us. I think you understand that instinctively. Probably in part, you're here tonight. That demonstrates that you care about something broader than yourself. Another thing that I've noticed, and I've read this in some of the books about, or some of the articles about why more people are turning to the law and going to law schools. Got this fly flying around my face here. The first reason why students say they applied to law school in surveys over the last 2 decades is they want to be able to provide for them and their families. And that's understandable. It's a great profession, a great way to be able to provide for you and your family. But the second reason, and for the first time in the last couple of years, the second reason has cropped up to place number 2, is that people want to be able to go out and defend our Constitution, defend the rule of law. And that's not necessarily a liberal or conservative ideology, but it's a belief that we've got to engage more broadly in the system. I believe that there is no better, more significant job in public service today where you can defend that rule of law, where you can make those contributions, than to serve as a state attorney general. And that's what I've tried to do in my time as the AG, making sure that the rule of law applies to everyone, no matter what they look like or where they come from or who they love or who they pray to or choose not to pray to. The rule of law must apply to everyone. And when we create others in our system, when we separate people out, when we apply the laws unfairly, we erode our democracy, we erode the rule of law, and we make everyone less safe. We make everyone weaker. It's that I have in mind when I go to work every day. It's that I had in mind 2.5 years ago when we assembled the strongest, smartest, most diverse staff in the history of the Office of Attorney General of Pennsylvania. I'm proud, for example, that today we have more women in positions of leadership than men, that our LGBTQ brothers and sisters sit around the table with me when we make a decision, that we have more people of color represented in my office than ever before. Because I fundamentally believe that in the law, that if you look like the people you are sworn to serve, you are going to make fair and just decisions. And so everything we do starts with who gets to sit around the table doing that work. And then the question is, when you are sitting around the table, when you do have that power, what are you going to do with it? First and foremost, as the Attorney General, you got to keep people safe. You've got to protect them. And for me, there's no more vulnerable population than our children in Pennsylvania. It's why on day 2, when I was briefed on our grand jury investigations, when I was told what was going on and I was told that there was a priest that may or may not have abused a child or two and was asked, do you want to move forward with this investigation? I said yes, because we've got to protect our children. A year and a half later, after bringing 150 people in my organization, in our operation, to work on this matter, we released a grand jury report that unearthed horrors. 301 predator priests, as you heard. Thousands of child victims the grand jurors found. And a conspiracy and cover-up that went from Pennsylvania all the way to the Vatican. What's happened since then has been profoundly impactful. 21 state attorneys general have publicly announced that they've opened investigations. The feds have launched a probe. Imagine what it's like sitting across a table from Attorney General Sessions and Attorney General Barr when you're suing them on a whole bunch of other stuff, but you're working with them on this. The feds are doing their part to try and unearth the truth as well. We are in probably the 3rd or 4th inning of this. Not to say it's a game, but just to give you a sense of the time frame we're in. More truth will come out. More horrors will be exposed. But what has changed in this country as a result of our work is that survivors are now being listened to. The prosecutors are understanding you've got to prosecute these cases of sexual abuse and sexual violence. And I'm proud of the fact that Pennsylvania took a lead on that issue. Public safety is paramount. When we think about public safety, we also recognize we've got to grapple with one of the biggest threats in our communities today, and that is gun violence. Mass shootings, everyday gun violence that is gripping our communities. The 1,500 people that died from gun violence in Pennsylvania in the last year alone. And I think we've got to be honest with ourselves about how we combat this. We combat this, yes, by passing new laws, like getting weapons of war off our streets and making sure we have universal background checks. But we also have to make sure that prosecutors are doing their jobs. We found out after I took office, for example, that crime guns weren't being put into the database that state law required. And so you know that refrain when people are against you pushing for new laws, they say, enforce the laws that are already on the books. I actually asked that question. What laws aren't we enforcing that are on the books? And that was a straightforward one. We weren't putting crime guns in a database. It was making it harder to combat gun violence. It was making it harder to hold those accountable that would go out and harm others. Today, that's changed in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and we're hopefully going to be a model for others. We've got to address gun violence in our communities. And when it comes to the loss of life, nothing is claiming more lives in Pennsylvania or across this country today than the heroin, fentanyl, and opioid crisis that is gripping our nation. We lose 12 Pennsylvanians each and every day. And you know, in law enforcement, what you do when you're trying to solve one of these challenges is you go to the supply chain. And for a long time, that meant that you went to the street corners and you arrested dealers. And we do our fair share of that. But if you really want to find the supply chain, the root cause of this crisis, you've got to have the courage to go to pharmaceutical company boardrooms and hold those executives accountable for the products they pushed out in the community that have created this cycle of addiction in places like Pennsylvania. And so to that end, we're a state that is suing these opioid manufacturers, both personally, when it comes to the owners who have pocketed ill-gotten gains to the tunes of billions of dollars, as well as holding the companies accountable. If we're really going to address this crisis and get at the root cause, you've got to hold the pharmaceutical companies accountable. And we in law enforcement have to understand that drug addiction is a disease, not a crime. And you've got to have compassion in your heart when you help those individuals. It's not just criminal work that we do in the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office. We work very hard to protect consumers, to make sure that there's an economic fairness and balance. Let me tell you an area that has gotten totally out of whack, and you know this better than anyone. That is the student debt crisis in this country. By the way, I'm still paying off my student loans to Georgetown Law. Can I say Georgetown Law School in here? Is that okay? I'm still paying off my student loans to Georgetown Law School, and our daughter, God willing, is going to go to college next year. We'll be paying loans for her as well. It shouldn't be this way. And what's happened in Pennsylvania is we have a company that has actually exacerbated the student debt crisis by adding $4 billion on the backs of students, on the backs of their families, through predatory practices. We've taken them to court. We're going to hold them accountable, and we're going to get that $4 billion sent back to students and their families where it belongs. Just one example of the consumer-type work that we're doing in the AG's office every day. We've also tried to dramatically expand the work of our office. We have a fair labor division, protecting workers' rights for the first time ever. We have a civil rights division, making sure that everyone is protected under the rules in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We have a policy shop that's working to advance criminal justice reform because we need that to happen now if we're truly going to have fairness in our system. We started the first ever statewide reentry council, focusing on returning citizens. When someone's released from jail today in America, 66% of them end up going back into jail. They end up either committing a crime or violating the terms of their probation. Think about it. If you got 66% of the questions wrong on your exams, you would not be an NYU law student much longer. Yet in this country, we are willing to accept the 66% fail rate in our criminal justice system. That's wrong, and we're working hard to change that. We know what the tools are, we know what the mechanisms are to make that better, and we are all safer. We are all better off. Human capital is improved if we're able to get that right. We have got to advance criminal justice reform, and we've got to make sure that our system works for everyone. Now, when I became Attorney General, actually when I ran for Attorney General, I never imagined that in order to protect everyone, in order to make sure that our system was fair for everyone, that I would be called upon as the Attorney General to sue the President of the United States to ensure people's rights and protect their interests. Yet that's exactly what's had to happen. I've gone to court 23 times against the Trump administration and won each and every time. And I've gone to court not just when I disagree with this president, otherwise, candidly, I probably would have gone to court about 10,000 times. I go to court when the president and his administration violate the rule of law. You know, I was talking to I have 4 kids, so I'm trying to remember which one it was. I was talking to my 5th grader who had a lesson in checks and balances. And of course, he learned, as we all did in school, about horizontal checks and balances, about the president and Congress and the courts all being a check on one another. What he didn't learn, though, are vertical checks and balances. The role that the states have in order to be a shield to protect the interests of our state citizens from unwarranted federal overreach, and a sword to advance the rights of our citizens. Right now, you are seeing states and states' rights become a progressive force for good in this country. Being a check on the president, being a check on this administration that disrespects the rule of law day in and day out. Now, I realize that some of you in this room, as I say that, disagree with my politics. But I ask you not to think about this in political terms. I ask you to think about this in terms of what you're studying day in and day out, what matters most to you, and that is the law. And so, for example, when the president went to Congress to do away with the Affordable Care Act, like the Affordable Care Act or not, he failed to muster a majority of votes to get that done. And he came back to the Oval Office and he signed one of those big executive orders with his Sharpie and he held it up for everybody to see. And the words on this executive order were to take away women's access to contraception in this country, something guaranteed under the Affordable Care Act. The next day, we were on the courthouse steps in Philadelphia and filed a lawsuit. 19 states joined us in that effort. Today in America, women continue to have access to contraception because of the rule of law, because our institutions of law still matter, even when people have political agendas that would try and push otherwise. Our planet is being attacked day in and day out by the unlawful policies being put forth by this administration. And time again, I've been forced to go to court to make sure, for example, that the Clean Air Act would be enforced. And we're going to continue to do that work. Protecting reproductive rights, protecting our planet, protecting student interests, as we've had to go to court multiple times to file suit against Betsy DeVos, who wants to take away rights from students and do things that are unlawful. Time and time again, we've been called on to act, and we'll continue to do that. Look, the last thing I want to say to you is really what I said at the outset of my comments here tonight, and that is to think about the importance of the rule of law, to think about your role in this discussion, to think about getting off the sidelines and getting in the game and doing your part to help others. You have an awesome amount of capability as an NYU law student and soon to be an NYU graduate who's practicing law. Use that power for the common good. Yes, use that power to make a good living. Use that power to care for you and your family. But make sure you use your big brains and your know-how to go out and do some good in the world. I find such great satisfaction in public service. I find great honor in being able to do this work on behalf of the 13 million Pennsylvanians. And it's a real honor to be able to speak to you here tonight. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to hearing what's on your mind. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sure you have some questions. Please, here we go.
Hi, my name is Adam. I'm a 1L. So you've worked in politics before, and now you're the Commonwealth's chief law enforcement officer. And you're saying your priority is to preserve the rule of law. But in terms of how you allocate resources and hiring decisions and what cases you choose to pursue, you are also making policy decisions. So what's your sort of personal calculus for balancing your role as a law enforcement officer with what may be your personal policy objectives or political leanings, because you are also an elected official?
Yeah. I think very little about the political leanings. I tend to view politics through this prism that if you do good work and you get good results, the politics kind of work themselves out. But you did raise a really important point about, your own sort of philosophical views, or your policy views, I think was the word you used. And you also used the word resources, right? Because you have limited resources. We have about 1,000 people in our office, but it's still not enough resources to be able to deal with all the different things you have. You have to deal with the top clear priorities. So I touched on just a few of them today. The opioid crisis, for example, combating gun violence, dealing with the student debt crisis, just a few examples that I use here. And so what you do is you try and say, these are the priorities. These are the things that I think are impacting the most people. And then the issue is, how do you go about doing that work, right? And how do you allocate your resources? So if we can, let's take the opioid crisis for a second, right? Historically, my predecessors would put nearly 100% of their resources into locking up dealers on the street corners. We still do that. But we also hold doctors accountable who are running pill mills. And so we have a whole new diversion unit that's just focused on that. We're also, as I talked about before, going after the pharmaceutical executives and the pharmaceutical companies for their role in this epidemic. And for the first time ever, we're actually investing our time in making sure people who are dealing with the disease of addiction get treatment, not typically something reserved for law enforcement. So you might put that more in the kind of the policy bucket as opposed to the legal bucket. We're working, for example, with police departments all across Pennsylvania. We started with 0, we're up to more than 50 police departments, where if you are suffering the disease of addiction and you walk into one of those police departments, no questions asked, they will put you into a treatment slot in that community because they've been specially trained to do that. I mean, that's just a total different mindset in terms of how you deal with this crisis. So the first thing you do is figure out what your priorities are. The second thing you do is within those priorities, how do you sort of allocate your resources within those buckets? The opioid crisis is an example of that. There's a lot I'd love to be doing, but because you've got a limited resource, because you've got limited budgets, you are really forced to pick and choose the things that are most impactful to the people that you try to serve. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Josh.
Good name.
I'm also from the Philly area.
Awesome.
Delaware County.
Montgomery County. All right.
And so you're talking the opioid stuff.
Yeah.
And holding the companies accountable and stuff. Your peers in other states have been starting to settle and all that stuff. Do you think that settling with the companies will be sufficient to fight the opioid crisis, or should either you and your peers look for something beyond that?
Sure. There's a handful of states that are leading the multi-state coalition. Myself, we're one of the lead states. And, you know, when you're sitting across the table negotiating with the different companies, you reach a point where, you know, you've pushed them as far as they can be pushed. They've put their best offer on the table. In some instances, it's worth taking the deal. In other instances, as the case of Purdue, which is what you were referring to, Purdue Pharmaceutical, I felt that that was a slap in the face to the people of Pennsylvania. I felt that this was a crisis they largely created. They manufactured this crisis. They made tens of billions of dollars off of this crisis that they manufactured. And then they put a paltry sum of money on the table, refused to admit wrongdoing, and weren't as transparent as I would like. That's why I decided not to accept that settlement and to continue to try to litigate this case. There are times to settle, there are times to litigate, and it really all depends on whether or not you feel like you can get, this is the best deal you can get for your citizens, whether there's some kind of admission of wrongdoing, and whether there are provisions in place to ensure that whatever that bad act is, whatever that wrong deed is, doesn't happen again. I felt that those things were absent in this Purdue case, which is why I didn't settle, and I'm going to continue to fight them in court. Thanks. Yeah.
I'm Gabriel. I got to go before you.
Thank you, Gabriel. All right. Delaware County, Philadelphia. I like it. That's great.
Pennsylvania is a pretty politically divided state. Obviously, Philadelphia is one of the biggest cities in the country. There's a lot of rural areas, a lot of post-industrial areas. How do you manage being a statewide official that has to work with police departments, for example, across the state, or deal with the state government being hostile to Transconnect Philadelphia and various other interstate conflicts when you represent them?
Sure. Here's what I've learned. In a diverse state like Pennsylvania, 13 million people, people don't think about these jobs from the standpoint of how far left are you? How close to center are you, right? I mean, you're going to go home tonight, turn on MSNBC, Fox, CNN, whatever, and they're going to have a whole conversation about these presidential candidates and who's further left than this person, who's in the middle. Is it good to be in the middle? Is it good to be on the left? Voters don't think like that. True, there are certain issues that we care deeply about, right? And we want to make sure that those candidates share our views. But what I have found in Pennsylvania, and I think it's probably true of places like in upstate New York and otherwise, is that if you're authentic and people really know who you are and where you stand, even if it's not a place that they agree, they're going to appreciate the fact that you're willing to be yourself and, most importantly, fight for them. Because elections are not about you, the candidate, it's about you, the people. It's about them and their future and what we're going to do for them. I remember in my campaign in 2016, I ran an ad about how I had been involved in an effort to advance the rights of LGBTQ Pennsylvanians. And I ran it in Pittsburgh, in Western Pennsylvania. And my friend from Delaware County in Philadelphia know Western Pennsylvania is different than Eastern Pennsylvania. And people said, "You are crazy. Why would you run an ad like that out in Western Pennsylvania?" And the truth is, it's because I'd be willing to run that ad in Eastern Pennsylvania. It's who I am. And I want people to know I'm willing to fight for folks who were being forgotten in our community at the time, our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. And I think that if you are authentic and true to yourself, if you let people know that you understand the challenges they face and you've got a plan to dealing with them, that it's far less about where you are on the left, right, center pendulum and more about, just getting out there and showing that you can fight and work hard for them. Yes, the political dynamics in Pennsylvania are challenging. Yes, we've got a Democratic governor and Republican majorities in the House and Senate. But I'm also someone who recognizes that if you're going to be any good to the people who elected you, you got to get stuff done and you got to be able to work with people. And so I pride myself on being able to work with people from all different walks of life, rural, urban, suburban, Republican, Democrat. And I think that's really, not as apparent in our politics today, and we need more of it. You got to be willing to be true to your values, be authentic to yourself, but be willing to work with others and, folks of all different stripes. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Martin Andriel, and last year was the political director for the Law Democrats here.
Great.
And I wanted to ask how we can get progressives to care about courts and care about justice as a voting issue, because we all seem to care about it after the election's over. When
Right.
we realize the people that are being nominated, but the other side has figured that out before election day, and what they can do with courts. And I'm wondering if you have any insights for people that are not in law school.
Yeah.
We all know.
Look, the one thing Mitch McConnell has done incredibly well is confirm conservative judges. And that is going to have an impact for generations to come. I think if you try to talk to, the average person out there about, conservative versus liberal judges, and a lot of them don't even know how judges become judges, how they go through the process, I think it's lost. But when you begin to talk about 2 or 3 issues, particularly economic issues, issues that affect them, and how these judges are unilaterally making these decisions, then I think they can get their mind around the fact that this is a serious issue. It's another reason I should care about United States Senate races, and it's a reason why I should be more politically engaged. Probably the easiest example to talk about right now is what's happening in federal court in Texas, where the Affordable Care Act is likely to be overturned by a group of federal appellate court judges. And that is something that I think everybody can understand, that you will no longer have the security you have in your healthcare system, albeit a healthcare system that needs dramatic reform and needs a lot of change. But you will no longer have that if this judge gets their way. And so I think it's really important that we take actual concrete examples of how these judges are impacting your lives and help put that on the ballot and make it less partisan and more about the individuals who are being negatively impacted. Yes?
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm also from Pennsylvania.
I love this. I didn't know this, by the way, as I go around.
I grew up in Elkins Park and was living in Philly.
Nice. I'm an Abington guy, so there you go. All right.
We're local. Well, I'm glad that you spoke to your faith and also your commitment to criminal justice reform. I'm
Yeah.
also Jewish. And we are on the Yom Kippur is coming up soon, the holiday of atonement and redemption. And you, sitting on the Board of Pardons in Pennsylvania, have the opportunity through the clemency and commutation process to, essentially write people in the book of life.
Yeah.
And in the past, you have been the sole dissenting vote against commutation in numerous going forward, I'm wondering if you would support or, end that practice of denying people the opportunity of commutation so that more people with life sentences have the opportunity, who have been redeemed, have the opportunity to go home.
Sure. Thanks for asking your question. And for those of you who aren't from Elkins Park or follow Pennsylvania and our Board of Pardons process, as the Attorney General, I am one of 5 votes on our Board of Pardons. And we, from time to time, will hear clemency cases, and it requires a unanimous vote in order to recommend clemency to the governor, who ultimately then has to sign off on the clemency. And I think that's a really fair question that you asked. I have been the lone dissenting vote on a handful of cases. And when I make these decisions on clemency, I make a decision focused on numerous factors. And one thing the other members of the board don't do is tell you what those factors are. So let me tell you mine, and then let me tell you where things stand today. And if you're not satisfied with the answer to my question, then you can follow up, okay? Number one, I consider public safety. If you're going to release someone from prison, are they going to create a public safety threat? Number two, I think a lot about the victims, whether it's a victim who's still living or the family members of victims who have been killed by this person who's in jail. Number three, I think a lot about whether or not fairness and justice was done during the trial. There have been instances where I've been able to get the DA or the judge, the original DA or the original judge from the case on the phone, where they have said, we screwed this up. I had one judge and one DA that I brought forth to the Board of Pardons who actually admitted that they added years on this conviction because they were trying to curry favor with the Pro-Life Federation for their next election, and obviously immediately voted for clemency for that person. So I think about public safety, I think about the victims, I think about whether or not there was an injustice in the underlying conviction. And then the fourth thing I think about is whether or not the underlying law is fair. So for example, I firmly believe that the felony murder statute in Pennsylvania, which says if you're the getaway driver, you get life in prison, the same as the person that pulled the trigger. So we've got people in prison in Pennsylvania today who didn't take a life, but who are in prison for life. So those are the different factors I think about. Now, it is true that I've been the lone dissenting vote a few times. What you didn't say, respectfully, I would submit to this group, is if you look at every single attorney general in the history of Pennsylvania combined, and you add up all the times they voted for clemency, I've beat that by a factor of, I think, 20. Last week, I voted for 9 clemencies, more than has ever been done in a day. There are example after example where I have voted for clemency because I do believe people deserve a second chance, and historically, my attorney general predecessors never voted to give them that opportunity. So as I look at these issues on a case-by-case basis, I think about those factors, I think about correcting injustices, and I'm proud of the fact that I've given more second chances than every single one of my attorney general predecessors combined. And I think that that's what the public wants. They want you to look at this carefully, they want you to look at it in a sober way, and they want you to make a decision that considers their interests of safety as well as the interests of the person incarcerated to make sure that you're doing justice. And that's what I try to do every day. Yeah.
So I appreciated everything that you said about your mandate is just to do authentic and genuine work.
Yeah.
And try your hardest, and that is what's most important. But as an elected official, even though you are the top sort of legal officiator in your state, you do have a political mandate. And as somebody who's from New York, not from Pennsylvania,
I don't know why I called on you then. I was really trying to limit this to Pennsylvania
I
people.
understand how different the climates are, but I have appreciated how Attorney General James has said she understands that she has a political mandate
Yeah.
to sort of widen her purview under a different administration. And I'm curious, I see the virtue in trying to appeal to everyone in your state and doing good, authentic work, but is that mutually exclusive with leaning into your political mandate and understanding that your responsibilities now as an elected official are different than had the election gone differently? And I think it's curious as
Sure. That's a good question. And I think Tish is great. She and I work together on a lot of different things. I do have a political mandate. In fact, I got more votes in 2016 than anyone in Pennsylvania, more than Donald Trump, who won Pennsylvania. And so, yeah, I do think about the political mandate I have, but I think it's important to use that mandate not for politics, but to advance causes that you think are interesting and you think are, not interesting, that's the wrong word, that you think are important to the people that you serve. So I think there's a difference. I think in these jobs, as attorneys general, you have to be very careful about engaging too much in politics. I think you have to be viewed as someone who's, yeah, you're political, right? You're a Democrat or Republican, but you know, they're kind of above the daily fray and the daily grind of politics. You do want to use your bully pulpit. You do want to advance causes. I talked before about our reentry council. You know, returning citizens and reentry is a real passion of mine. And yeah, sometimes that goes outside the sort of necessary mandate of an attorney general. But there I would use my bully pulpit, my political mandate, to use your word, to advance that cause. I just think it's important that in advancing those causes, you don't do so in a political way, because you do need to make sure that everybody in Pennsylvania, including Republicans, has confidence in the decisions that you're making and that you're making them for the right reasons. And so that's a different balancing act than, say, your congressman or your senator or even your governor. And I just think it's a different type of job, and I try and do that job in a different type of way. Yeah.
I'm from New York, so I did spend the last 5 years in politics.
Nice. Okay, thank you.
And I really appreciated your response to the question asked earlier, and I'm grateful to know that you've granted clemency to activists.
Yeah.
And also, I think knowing that so many people have been sentenced to death by incarceration in Pennsylvania, there's a huge opportunity to do more. And the current thresholds for commutations in Pennsylvania is unanimous, having been created by a real reactionary legislature in
Right.
the 90s. I know there's current legislation up below that threshold to a 4-to-1 vote. I want to hear what
Right.
your thoughts were on that legislation.
Sure. The threshold, as I said before, is 5-0. There are, and it's constitutionally mandated that we are assembled the way we are as a Board of Pardons. And there is legislation to try and change it to 4-1. Here's my view. If the governor supports it to be 4-1, I will as well. And I want to explain to you why I said it that way, because I don't work for the governor. I don't take my direction from the governor. He's a wonderful man and a good friend. But the reason is we are an advisory board, a constitutionally mandated advisory board to the governor, who ultimately makes that decision. So, ma'am, my response to your question before, when I said last week we recommended 9 for clemency, ultimately it will be up to the governor whether or not he wants to grant that clemency. I think the governor should be able to have a board of pardons that reflects his vision, his views, and his approach to addressing clemency. And if he believes that a lower threshold, so perhaps more cases will get to him, then I would certainly be in favor of that. I would point out, though, for example, in our meeting last week, I think we had 21 cases for clemency. There was not a single case where there was only 1 dissenting vote. There were some cases where there were 2 or 3 dissenting votes, so this wouldn't have changed that. But nevertheless, having more of an opportunity for the governor to get the cases that he wants when this is his advisory board is certainly something I support.
We have time
Thanks.
for one more question, if there is one.
Sure.
Your job sounds all-consuming. How do you balance your professional and family responsibilities?
Your job sounds consuming. How do you balance your professional and personal commitments? Well, I said at the top, I've got 4 children, and they are the most important thing to me. My wife and I have been together since the 9th grade. She's pretty darn important, too, in that equation. And what I try to do is manufacture time that my family can count on me and know that I'm there. And for me, it's not just about being there for my kids. It's about having my kids be able to be there for me. They help keep me healthy and sane and grounded. So we do a few things. Every Friday night, we have our Sabbath dinner together. And to be honest with you, it's, you know, in part a religious experience, but it's way more just knowing that all 6 of us are going to be around the table together at least one time a week. when my kid has a game that's really important to them or a performance that's important to them, I'm able to say to my team, I'm going to be there. And so I'm not going to be in the office at 8 o'clock this morning or 9 o'clock. I'll be there at 11, but you know what? They'll be able to get me at 1 in the morning when they need me as well. And I just think it's an important lesson for all of you as you go forward to make sure that while you go out and practice law, whether in a public way or in the private sector, and that job's going to be incredibly important. You're going to be doing serious, serious stuff. You've got to make sure to carve out that time to remain grounded, to be committed to your family, and to have those moments during the week where you know that's your time for yourself and for your family. It's true of exercise. It's true of, I'm not into meditation. If you're into meditation, whatever you're into, finding that opportunity to have those moments where you can stay centered and grounded. And interestingly enough, I never really appreciated it till I was in this job, particularly on white-collar crime, public corruption, cases like that we prosecute. A lot of times it's the people who lost the things that grounded them. It's the people that kind of lost their way, lost their connection to their family, lost their connection to whatever it was that kept them centered, that tend to get in trouble. And so it's very interesting for me, given the way I've always tried to conduct myself in public service, the way I've tried to conduct myself as a father and a husband, to see those that maybe make the wrong choices and what is lacking in their lives or what's lacking in their existence at that moment in time. So it's incredibly important. It's something I hope you will all pay close attention to as you go out in the workforce, is figuring out how to stay grounded and true to yourself. If you're true to yourself, you'll be your best self. And with that, I am really grateful for the opportunity to be with you tonight. Thank you for your time. It's really an honor to speak to you. Thank you.